Okay, so I really enjoyed our last conversation where you're saying, New Year's resolutions, and we went through sort of self-control and all
Someone who
those
was
kinds of
very
things. And then
ambitious.
we looked at somebody who was actually pursuing something that I think is really helpful
Yes.
in that first component of perspective for
Yeah.
life's new framework of
Who
um,
I am.
telling.
Finally understanding who I am. I think that's a worthy project for sure. And I think the first thing I said to this person, it's remarkable that you realized that that's something to, that you're doing. And I really commented how brave that is considering the position that she was before. But I asked what motivated this. It is turning certain age somehow makes time more tangible. And
Yep,
she felt more tangible. So there is more behind than more that is than what is left.
probably. Yeah.
And there are every age that we now build on is actually not anymore youthfulness, and then the changes are much more significant. So the planning is just changing the way I plan, ambition that I can plan things, ability to start, ability to finish it depending on the scale, capacity of body to push through some of the big projects if I ever wanted to plan. Suddenly everything is not anymore as well, just be whoever you want to be and you can be whatever you want, which youth comes with. Um, there is a sense of acceptance of some doors being closed. Now, we want to come back on
On
menopause,
menopause
and
specifically,
there
yeah.
is a reason for it, obviously. There's something that we have noticed, and there's quite a lot of discussion on this. So we're just going to add probably voices to it. That the reality is that the physiology does influence how we feel about ourselves and psychologically experience ourselves. And so the change that the body goes for women and in this age influence how the brain functions. By default, there is an influence on the mind as well. So maybe we wanna unpack that.
So let me touch on a couple of things that you mentioned so far. I've always find it interesting as we go through various transitions in life, the way we said New Year. Well, that's a construct of the mind in many
Exactly.
respects that makes it seem something that we can work with or use, or it's another day, as we said, right? But it's a construct that can be helpful. Well, you said, the person reaches a point in time, whether it's 50 or whatever. I'm always amazed when I sit with some people and they say, I'm turning 30, you know, and I'm turning 30 and I don't know, or I'm 35 and now I'm closer to 40 than I am at 30 or 40, and these are the kinds of things that I
Yes.
hear with people often. And because they are markers in our lives. They
Where
give
we
us
take
points
stock.
of reference.
Yeah,
And
it's
now all of a sudden, again, like this person saying, I've probably lived more than half my life. Well, that's probably true. We don't know that for certain, but that's probably not
high
far from wrong.
probability. Yes.
And certainly in the latter part of my life, I'm not going to be physically, functionally what I was in the earlier part of my life. And there's your, acceptance of reality. You get some people who are like, I refuse, age is just a number. And the reality is, when we consider age, the vast majority of the age decline relates to deconditioning more than it does relating to actual chronological aging. In other words, again, when I do less as I get older, so I decline more rapidly, not because I'm older, but because I'm doing less.
But I
And
am
that's
doing less because
now again, the person might be doing less because they feel old, think they're old, or it's not appropriate. So there are many reasons for the underlying. The
the
only reason,
physiology does influence.
and we're getting there,
Yeah.
the only reason I'm mentioning this is because there is hope. You don't reach 50 and now all is lost. The idea is, again, if you recognize that the majority of the decline that people experience mentally, emotionally, or mentally and physically certainly relates to doing less. And then this, if you don't use it, you lose it type of principle within the body taking hold. That's the thing and the reason why I might sit with an 85-year-old and say, how much exercise are you doing? And encourage them to start exercising because there can be gains from the position they're in. So I use that just simply to say age, yes, is a marker. Yes, there are certain things that relate to functional, physical, structural changes within the system. And you mentioned brain being one of them. Yeah, brain's not getting better. And if you think about the whole point of perspective for life is this understanding that we navigate life through viewing opportunities and threats in our situations through our senses and through the lens of our perspective, well, that's running on hardware. That's running on a brain system. And that's running dependence on the things that lubricate all that function. And we might talk to things like neurotransmitters and those kinds of things. Well, what are the things that make up those things? Well, those are vitamins and minerals and proteins and all of the various elements that come together. The point is, there is an aging decline that related to menopause is probably one that maybe many years ago, I remember when I first started in practice, it was often quite dismissed as your mom got through it, get over it. What are you whining
Yes.
about? Which I think we're coming to understand now is probably a little hard. Well, that's probably an understatement. Is harsh and was probably somewhat naive, because I think we are at a point now where we recognize that people's perspectives are heavily influenced by what's actually happening in the physiology. Again, our perspective from pure physiology of fatigue is different from feeling energized. Well, what happens if I'm now experiencing a number of these symptoms that are
And
associated?
they come together. It's never one. I mean, it's not like just
So I know you
fatigue.
know the subject well in terms of it's been an interest for you.
Feels
I'll leave it at
personal,
that.
man. It
That
feels
was
very
not
personal.
personal.
No,
Right.
I mean
Yeah.
the age,
Right.
because of
So
age, it feels all very
So
personal.
let's think about it. We've acknowledged the reality that menopause, right? And if we're defining that, if we're saying there's a sort of a time period transition, if menopause or the climacteric is from around the age 45 to 55, give or take
Mm-hmm,
5 years, well, the initial changes are starting to happen probably 5 or 10 years before that. So by the
Yes.
time you start getting to 35,
I mean,
40, 45, you're already experiencing some of the things that would relate to decline. I think it's just a
yes.
fact,
Yes.
right? So with that in mind, how does one navigate that? I said earlier, well, generally, anytime we're dissatisfied with something, there are only three things we can do. One is rescue the mood. So we go ahead and we knock ourselves out, or we try and fix things, or we come to terms with the fact that there are certain changes that are beyond us. And even though we're not happy about it, we identify where can I move on to engage in other meaningful, satisfying things. So those are the three options. And the third one is acceptance, which you've already referenced. So how do we unpack at this point, and I'll lean on you with this one, the kinds of things that we have a good understanding are impacting mentally, emotionally, physically, and socially in a person who's going through this transition of menopause?
This is pretty complex because you know that I started this conversation with you years before it became really relevant to me itself as a really stage of life. Is how would I prepare myself that I have a soft landing, the softest landing? Because I know I'm falling. I just want the biggest
Very
parachute.
proactive. We were very
biggest,
proactive.
biggest parachute. Now, what worried me actually, and you laugh, is the brain, which I probably, if I'm skipping few words, just now why. Um, but that personality change, the mood swings, that worried me. That lack of stability, lack of reliance of myself. So that just was really the biggest shock to me too, because everyone was talking about the body really exclusively. Okay, so you're gonna feel this, you're gonna feel that, and then there's gonna be change. And there was so much in one area, and then so little in the personality, and actually what influence day to day, which is relationships.
Yeah, which is more of the stuff that I think you and I will focus on in this talk rather than other
Exactly.
areas.
So
Yeah.
that was for me important. So then I realized that exactly how can I collect as much credit for my
Mm.
body that almost first I buy myself a honeymoon period, so as long as I can, so delay or soften kind of things. So what transition is so slow that I have time to accept
Mm.
things. So the question was really for me, right, as I'm entering, what is the best really way to enter and what can I do from supporting physiology, and then what kind of mindset should I come in? So there are two things really. Mindset will rely on really supporting my physical health, and then the physical health will also influence. So they're all interplayed and they're very much here. And then as I get into full blown really stage transition, there was a really identity crisis. There's no
What
doubt.
do you mean by that? I mean, I know I have no
Well,
idea, but
I think
say
as a
it more.
female, there is that sense of I'm old, right? So there is the sense of aging. Society is very much anti-aging. So there's a physical attractiveness. Everyone warns you that you're gonna age much faster than and then every time you look at any video, it's like, okay, so at 50, and they show you this horrible dry plum face. It's like you're gonna turn into something. So there's a lot of reference point that after 50, everything is escalating, going faster, and in a direction that society really rejects. It doesn't value at all. There's no reward. Like, so looking older, less attractive, because a physical look is now for women, it's unbelievably rewarded. We have never seen such a strong platforms that we use right now are all reflecting on physiology. It's how you look. And reward is there all the time. So the age now and anti-aging is really the way to go. So we have creams that are anti-aging. We have everything is anti-aging, meaning you shouldn't age. But that's also what I should accept, right? I mean, that's normal part of life. For women, it's far more narrative than for men. We see this as well with men. But so aging gracefully doesn't mean anything, to be honest, at the moment. We don't know what that is. But going back, so how do I enter into perimenopause and menopause, knowing that it's quite a long journey
Yeah.
from establishment of really, that's it, I'm in menopause officially. So what do I do there? That's my question to you. What's the preparation stage? Once I'm in it and when the symptoms come, what kind of self-support, what kind of support, how would I become sensitive to it? And then, it's really that soft landing kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you go through it while understanding, maybe reflecting the scale of this? Like there are us that some women go through it quite nicely, and then some of us really, I mean, feel the full blown of everything. It's a cluster
So I
of
think you and I have a tendency at times to ask a
what.
lot of questions that require a very long answer, which I'm normally
So
quite
we can
comfortable with.
start somewhere.
So I think we
Pick the
break it
start.
down. So what I would say to you is, if you're looking at this idea of how do we prepare, and I love all the things that you've said, how do we prepare for a soft landing, or how do we try and make the transition as, sort of sharp and painless as possible?
Yeah.
I would say to you that whenever I look at anybody in terms of holistic health, I'm always looking at 3 levels: baseline health, treat the medical condition, and if those 2 things are in place, what do we do for optimal health? So I would say to you that in order to try and make the best possible transition, the basics come into play, and there's no getting away from it. Do your utmost to eat well, to maintain level of physical activity, to try and get enough sleep, even if that sleep is somewhat disrupted by some of the physiological changes. Make adjustments to the room. Inevitably, that means freezing the husband, whatever it might be, which I'll come to on the relational side in a moment. I think it's important to supplement well. And there's a lot to be said from baseline, just vitamins, minerals, cofactors, to some of the other kinds of things. I think that there are things within naturopathic, the natural herbal realm, where there can be support. This is not curative. This is not a disease that we're treating. I think that there are things that are particularly supportive, even in the medical profession, where I know that there is use of possibly starting on a very, very low dose of certain hormones. So instead of going and saying, well, you're in menopause, now you go into hormone replacement therapy, there might be guidance from somebody who says, oh, I see you going into this. And somebody who's specialized in this area might say, well, let's start you on a low dose, maybe depending on the status of the uterus and that type of thing, an estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So I think that there are a lot of things that can be done like that, but you need to be aware of, number one, they probably will benefit you. And number two, it's something that a lot of that is going to remain your responsibility. So trying
That's
to
what
make
we have
sure.
control over.
And that's why we want to work with the things we can control,
Exactly.
because we're going to have to accept the things we can't. So that's why I start with baseline. I'm a firm believer in every facet of life, do the basics
Can we
brilliantly.
emphasize the payoff of this? Because I think
So let's
many
think about-
underestimate and go immediately for other
Right.
routes that are actually more in the
Here's
medical.
the payoff, right? And I would say to you, the payoff is not only in how I feel and function now, the legacy effect, in other words, the effect of what's coming down the line in terms of maybe a preservation of bone mass and preservation of muscle strength, preservation of cardiovascular health. all of these kinds of things, we know that the things that I've already mentioned, the resting and the eating, the movement, those kinds of things, the physical activity, the preservation of muscle mass, I always refer to as, if you ask me what's the best predictor or biological predictor of aging, I'm always going to say muscle mass because it's reflective of physical activity. And physical activity, not only the benefit of having stronger muscles which carry me through, I'm also then having to develop those muscles. I'm having to take care of cardiovascular health. I'm having to maintain a routine. I'm having to exercise self control. I'm having to do all of these things. So the benefits are collective, they're cumulative, and really those are the kinds of things that can carry you very, very well, irrespective of maybe some of the other more specific symptoms that you're going to have. So by maintaining a very good baseline health in the areas that I've said right now for as long as you can, and I literally mean as long as you can until you're either bedridden or dead. And the probabilities, if you're doing what I'm saying right now, it's not going to be a case of bedridden and dead. It's going to be, I live well, pretty close up to the day I die. Well, we know that that's for some people, for many people, I would hope, is the
Ideal.
target,
Yes.
right? So these things that we're talking about here are they transcend the benefit only in the area of hormones and menopause. So baseline health is absolutely crucial, absolutely crucial. Now, one can get a bit more specific in terms of some dietary factors. One can get a little bit more specific in terms of things that maybe when a person is starting to have some of what we call these vasomotor type symptoms, so hot flushes, possibly headaches, or these kinds of things. We know that there's certain things food wise, hot food, just temperature wise, spicy food, those kinds of foods we know tend to aggravate or trigger these kinds of responses. I do think that being mindful of adjusting some of the dietary things, which usually involve, again, eating well, eating more salads and eating, or possibly taking more smoothies or these kinds of things. These things are contributing in both areas. Those that I said would reduce that sort of vasomotor response or the vascular sort of episodes, as well as then giving the person just generally good, healthy, sort of cellular function supply. So you come to the basics, you do them well, but I think recognizing that the doing, when the person is mentally mindful of the fact that this is really beneficial for me, even if I don't necessarily feel like doing it, um, very important. If the person is mindful that even though I am exercising and I am eating well, doesn't mean that I'm, now going to be ready to do a triathlon or I'm going to look the way I did when I was 30. So being reasonable and realistic in terms of what one can expect, managing those expectations in terms of the things that you're actually doing that we've said are beneficial beyond
Well,
what
the
you probably
mood
realize.
boosting is amazing when you start exercising and increasing cell. I
When you
mean, it's
eat well, when
unbelievable
you
how
rest well,
quickly.
when you exercise well,
Yeah.
when you supplement well, again, the body functions well. Here on the bottom right hand corner of the mind map is healthy function. And what we see disruption when there is stress and fatigue, or there is a diseased state, or a transitional phase, such as a menopause. So you're looking at these things and saying, well, one of the best things to do is to go in prepared to soften the blow by doing the basics brilliantly.
So you mentioned therapeutic, so
Hmm.
kind of treating the underlying. So I know a lot of women say, "Oh, well, I'm putting on weight, I can't lose weight." So is there any merit to this?
Well, let me say this again. A lot of the stuff that I would sort of know about menopause and the climacteric, it's not something I see often anymore. I see certain cases, but the stuff that I probably am still mindful of is what I was thinking about 10 or 15 years ago. So I know that when we go through that sort of transitional phase, there is an accelerated 5 year, maybe it's adjusted now, but from my understanding, there's an accelerated loss of muscle, gain of fat, loss of bone mass. I think there can be a decline of sort of mental cognitive function up to 40%. I mean, that's massively significant. I think we understand things probably,
That is true. I mean, some women really complain how poorly they manage stress and also how life feels more stressful and they can't even see why. I mean, one thing they say they I overreact. I
Yeah.
started significantly
Yes. Short
overreacting.
fuse,
Yes.
exaggerated
Very
responses.
poor management of my
Yes.
emotions. Anger
Yes.
coming in faster, stronger.
Mm.
Dissatisfaction with life, dissatisfaction with relationships.
That's the one I want to touch on because I'm presenting what is something beneficial for every person. Well,
Exactly.
don't neglect its value in a transition of life like this.
Exactly.
The second thing I'm saying to you is the value that that contributes mentally, is huge, but the expectation, not the license, not I'm going to go through things that might make me a little bit less patient or
Edgy.
more explosive or edgy or whatever. Not license I'm going through menopause, therefore you all just, beware. I do think that the management of expectation for self is one thing, but the management of the expectation of the family and the partner, or in this case, the husband, is very,
Even
very helpful.
professionally, I mean, you're looking at having hot
Even
flashes at
so,
the dream
right.
meeting.
So I
So
think,
fun.
I think again, yes, a willingness to recognize and accept that this is a reality where depending on the relationship in the professional
True, true.
front, I'm not sure how I'd be, parading that, but it might be somebody who's close. Hey, if this
It
happens,
does influence.
right? Yeah.
It's not that.
But with the partner, with the husband, I would say if one is able to say, would you be with me on this journey? And there are times when I'm probably going to behave in ways that you think are crazy, that you think are unfair, that you think are unreasonable. And I'm probably going to agree with you when I feel better. But in the moment, I'm probably not going to agree with you. And the more you sort of confront me on that, the probability is the greater the conflict's going to be. So I'm not asking again for you to excuse me. I'm asking for you to understand and help me. And then hopefully my commitment will be is if I have responded like that, right? And I have exaggerated something or, been fiery and angry in my response, that when I do sort of settle back, because it's not perpetual, now the person's fallen off the cliff and now they can't think anymore, right? The point is there will be a realization at some point, whether an hour later or the day later or whatever, that, what, I didn't treat you um, fairly, or, I'm not excusing it, I'm acknowledging it, and I'm saying thanks for being patient with me. So this is that opportunity to give and reciprocate. And by managing the expectation, by just saying again, I am going through a change, and no matter how much I don't like it, and no matter how much I'm trying to deal with it or fight with it, I have to acknowledge it is a reality that I cannot overcome in its entirety. I'm doing my best. Help me with that, patient with me. And I'd even go as far as to say this, the intimacy in relationship through menopause is something that mustn't be overlooked.
What do you mean?
I'm talking about within the relationship between a husband and wife, right? Oftentimes there are physiological changes that are producing sort of a distancing from one another, whether it be discomfort or whether it be loss of
Okay.
libido or any of those kinds of things. Even making sense or understanding those kinds of things is helpful, but making sure that there is a mutual understanding and, in my opinion, as an engagement as frequently as allowed, because that is good for both parties in the
Yeah, I think
relationship.
it's involving a partner in this in a conversational way. There's no doubt. Educating about definitely. So there is understanding of why things are happening. They're more complex than what they appear. I don't choose to be angry. There are certain things that are amplifying just the sensitivity, but also uh, helping other person to understand what amplifies or what kind of triggers are there. And it's funny, the project of knowing yourself and self-awareness comes if you have done that groundwork. I mean, it helps significantly because you can express what is happening, how things are changing for you, what kind of sense of self you have, how is that influencing, and engaging the other person to become a partner on the journey rather than bear it.
Yep.
Just sit there, bear it, and then eventually, hopefully, we will come
Yeah.
out to survive. We survive this. But the question is, how does the person play significant role rather than just someone who takes it and shows
Yeah, as a
compassion, but rather,
bystander.
no, we want someone who to also feel they're engaged and contribute to, remember that parachute I said? They're actually part of that stitching as well for me. How do they add for me that as well moment so addressing a lot of these things in advance, asking them to think with you a little bit
This
more.
assumes, in many respects, it assumes a good relationship, right? In order to do that. Let me go as far as say this again, as we had spoken about in one of the previous videos. When there is this transition, there is a functional change physically, right? But there is a role change as well, as
Yes,
we've discussed.
yes,
So now you're sitting with a situation where, in fact, I sat with somebody 2 weeks ago, somebody I've known from when I was 18. They were newly married around about that time. I think they've been married a couple of years. And I got to see them recently after yeah, quite a number of years. I think as many as 17 or 15 years. And they are actually traveling around together. They took, I think, 4 or 5 or 6 months to say, hey, we're taking a break from our careers right now. They're in their mid 50s, sort
yes,
of late 50s. And what we've seen is other people, for example, have said they're going to wait till retirement age and then they're going to travel. And what they ended up finding was that when they got to the retirement age, they were functionally not capable. One was ill. They couldn't do this. They said, we're not going to wait for that. And I applaud their decision and commitment and the time. And as I was speaking to her, she said to me, I know you've got still three young kids. I've got an 18, 15, and 12-year-old. And she was saying, as much as I love my children, her daughter and her son, who are, both adults and one married already, it's you've got so much to look forward to when it's just you and Bron in terms of just the life that you have sort of with adult married children. And I looked at it and I was like, I loved the idea, but the reason I'm going there is because when one recognizes that possibly relationships, by the time we get into the 40s and early 50s, I see many relationships there that are so heavily strained. Plus, then this transition into menopause is compounding that tremendously. One has to say, listen, we need to work on this because the probability is, right, the things that we're going to be doing going forward is, ordinarily all things being equal, we live till we're 70, 80, or 90. That's 40% of our lives. That's just the two of us to a large degree. So I think the better we manage the transition now, and there's an
yes,
allowance of a growing closeness of the relationship where there is a full care and attention again from the wife to the husband and a full care and attention from the husband to the wife. Well, that's been missing in the traditional family sort of setting where there's been children, where the wife has been massively, sort of taken away, taking care of kids. Not to say the husband is not engaged, but I think it's a fair, sort of generalization to make. Well, now we have the opportunity to turn attention to one another. And as we're doing that, it's through helping one through a difficulty that may impact 5%, may impact 50%. I don't know what that's going to be in any given case. But the reality is this, in as much as New Year is a fresh start, I'd say maybe a great way of approaching it is menopause is a fresh start to a whole different element and aspect of life. That's not a reframe. It's just basically a different look in many ways at what I think is genuinely doable.
great.
Relationship, I think, through menopause is key.
Yes. So you touched on intimacy. Is there something you want to mention? As you said, how would that even be addressed? One of the
Well,
things that I quite often ask is that, and I have seen this really. We all know couples and we all talk, and I guess women more so than men. But when trouble starts in the bedroom, we actually don't know how to talk about it. Is
yeah,
there a way things to be addressed better? How would you resolve? Because the vulnerability level that comes in is so high. And also, we always have this imagination, at least the assumption and stereotype, it should be all spontaneous and it should be all working on its own. There's some kind of magic now. We should not need to talk about anything. It should just work. And if it doesn't, we're not for each other. So I think there's something there. And in transitional stage here, I think there's no doubt
absolutely.
conversation is so much in the very beginning, to me, very beginning, because women will feel the change. There is no
Hmm.
doubt majority of women will feel the change. That
As
is
will the
part,
men.
yes. I think women definitely get into change earlier, especially if the partner is a closer age. So that conversation and already seeing how can I prevent certain things? How can I still enjoy things? How can I involve the partner? So let's maybe a little bit
So here's my take on that.
open
First
that.
and foremost, it's an area that I would say I highly would encourage people to go ahead and preserve as best they can, right? In terms of the intimate relationship.
I'll prevent it. Okay.
In saying that, both preventively and for, because I will say this, I don't think intimacy is the be all and end all
I
or the
agree.
maker or breaker of a relationship. But I'll tell you this, without exception, when I see a relationship breaking up, intimacy's out the window
And before they
2, 3
verbalize
years
it,
before.
interesting
Yeah.
enough.
So
Yes.
my point is, and there's a lot to unpack there. I think the scope of what I do with Perspective for Life, to be honest with you, in the same way that in general family practice of complementary medicine, I always sort of bypassed or skirted the area of gynecology and obstetrics and that sort of area, focused on other areas. Well, the same would apply in many respects to my take on the intimacy side of relationship. I will emphasize the importance of it. I will emphasize the value of it. I will emphasize that it can be very well navigated together where there is a mutual commitment and understanding and respect and mutual commitment to the other person's enjoyment and pleasure. But I would say to you that I think that there are people way more qualified to speak to the issue than I am in terms of at a professional level.
So maybe we can touch this. Is the loss of libido inevitable? Because the way
That's a big word.
some narrative there is really in. So I really worry when we over pathologize something. I do think that with our desire to really recognize how much some women suffer through this stage, and to recognize the whole landscape out there for the menopause and what we're going to go. I do feel that we have pathologized and even added a sense of really some termination. And I mean, like there are certain complete losses, and a lot of women really worry because the language is so strong, definitely. And I lose a little bit the whole spectrum, really. I have some extremes. Lots of extremes are discussed, and which somehow translate into that's normal. So these extremes are now normal, and so I, and
So
I almost
normalizing,
waiting. I'm almost
right.
waiting to
So
some tsunami
right.
thing.
So remember this again, normalizing something. I really want to draw the distinction between trying to find a license for something and trying to have an understanding of something. There are times when for some women, it might be with menopause is a loss of libido, and therefore I'm in that stage, therefore leave me alone. And people could
Yes.
use that excuse to seemingly their benefit. What I'm saying to you is the potentially short-term gain there is going to ultimately end up as a long-term loss in your relationship. That I guarantee you, absolutely guarantee you. So one's looking at that again, and one's saying, again, this is not my area of expertise, but I can speak to it enough in terms of at least something to ponder, to think about. The general tendency, and I'm generalizing, is when women typically in an intimate relationship go for periods of time without that intimacy, the loss of interest is substantially more
Yes.
accelerated and intense
Yes.
than on the man's side. So on the male side. So we're looking at that and saying, if that is not something that is guarded against, right? Which is why I say that intimate relationship needs to be something that is nurtured with the changing terrain, mindful of the expectations of what happens both sides, with care and sensitivity. The point is you want to keep nurturing that, because to not do that is going to leave one in a state where you started out by saying, is loss of libido inevitable? I'll say this to you. The probability is it is if it is not taken care of. So again, really not because it's not in my comfort zone to have the conversation, right? Because it's such a meaningful subject, but it's not a subject that I deal with enough on a professional basis
I think what we are just pointing
to,
that everything is, there are people around us that we could rely on,
yes.
and
Yeah.
that we are engaged, and we
I
are
know you
walking
make
through
reference to
together.
somebody, and I'm happy to even mention those people's names, because at the end of the day, if somebody's taking the time to listen to this and
Okay, we can drop the links
who,
actually.
okay, yeah, I mean, you can do
There are
that,
a
but who
few
would you
people.
mention?
So there is a one person, Caris Masden. I mean, she's in UK. She's just brilliant. She went through early menopause, which requested from her to accept certain things very early when most women don't even think about it. She was very open. She had a huge sense of I want to share, and I want women to really understand where is help, what kind of help is really meaningful, but above all to guard themselves from predatory behavior from a lot of people jumping now on the whole trend of menopause and overselling the supplements, overselling the
Now,
tests,
there's a danger of
over
that.
diagnosing, over pathologizing, and taking pretty much dogmatic attitude that we should all be on hormone replacement therapy because it has a preventative now effect. So even if you don't have the symptoms, you would benefit from taking hormones because you will. So you kind of reduce the level of cardiovascular risk and all this, and so even Parkinson and Alzheimer. And to be honest, the science of some of these things is not strong enough. So she's bringing us back to now and here. And so invest in really your health, and she's the same baseline health. Supplements that are
Sense.
easy to convenient, meaning
Yeah.
they're not financially overpressing your budget. So you can have consistency, which she emphasized. It's the consistency. You can't
100%.
engage on
I
something
could not.
that's just going to last 3
3
months
months and
and
you're
then
done.
and you're done. Because no
100%.
matter what you do, you're building habits for life.
Yes.
So this is just a stage that you're going to go through because it's symptomatic. But aging in itself has a challenges that you should take care of, regardless, which
is why
applies to men and women. So everything that I'm saying to you, yes, you're more motivated. So I'm guessing you're more motivated. You're experiencing bigger disruptor to your life, but we can use this to actually build habits that will serve you so much more and possibly have a ripple effect on your family around you and the partner and engage them in training and maybe bring them to lose weight together and engage in the
What
activities
did I
that.
say earlier? The
So
menopause might actually be considered a fresh start. It's
yeah,
a new year.
yeah, it's a new year
It's a happy new
resolution.
decade, or whatever it might be.
But that she does say that you can liberate yourself from a lot of kind of nonsense that you were worried about. How I look, do other people find me attractive? Is this the right look? So there's a lot, and she does emphasize this is a wonderful opportunity. You almost get the license to take a wonderful stock of your life and have kind of reinforced the partnership. If you're having long term, this is it. And she mentioned this. I think you and I mentioned coming into the freedom of being couple again when you
I
have
like
the
that
maturity,
description. I
when
love
you
that
have the
description.
maturity,
Mm.
you have a life experience, you actually know what priorities are. You know how to guard each other.
Should be at your best.
You have commitment, right? You have understanding of each other's vulnerability. You hope to have that. You have proven really a lot of things to each other. There's a lovely, lovely stage you should be coming in.
I want to actually make sure that we maintain that you just said. I think it's about the third time we're saying it now. Let's approach this as there is something to be optimistic about.
Absolutely.
I think if we can maintain that, and then yes,
while
we've
asking
made
for
a
help
mention.
where it's
Yes.
really and finding the right help and never, just not
Make sure that link goes in appropriately
Okay.
because I know that you're familiar with
Okay.
it. I actually quite enjoyed that discussion. Again, it's not something that I do a lot of anymore, but I do anticipate that with Perspective for Life, what's going to end up happening because there's such a significant mindset component and baseline health component that we will actually be able to offer fairly significant
I think so.
guidance, direction, and support in terms of doing the basics brilliantly.
Definitely. I think something that I kind of mind hobby horses. The society we live in is that the visuals matter and how you look matter and attachment of identity to that. And if that's where identity is attached, then it's inevitable to lose with aging. Definitely the change of physiology and definitely look. There's a lot of really women who just find this horrible. I mean, it's just the entering.
When you mentioned it earlier, and it's not ready for this conversation, but when you mentioned it earlier, what was coming to my mind when you said when you've almost gone beyond your best by date, not the terminology
exactly.
you used, but if the point of reference is purely physical, yes, well, the reality is all of us are going to find ourselves, men maybe a little later than
And
women.
best for the sake of, and I always ask, best, why do I
Great
have
question.
to look young?
Right.
So because
But the sad
someone should
part-
choose me, someone should notice me, someone should, what am I losing?
The sad part, I'm saying, what we are losing out on because of that mindset is that the people who have gone through life, who have life experience, who are in their 60s and 70s, who probably have so much that they can aid or help in the shaping of the perspective of the people who are 10, 12, 18, 20, that connection has been lost to a large degree. And in sense, we look at that and we say we've lost the sense that the older generation has value to add because they are relics, because they are dinosaurs, because they are now a burden rather than a
Last
source
century.
of tremendous, tremendous
Exactly.
life experience. And I think that, as you were mentioning it earlier, that's what came to mind. I think we possibly also then need to make sure that we're encouraging those who are older, to recognize that they can have a sense of clarity in life, that they need to be willing in many ways to share within their own families or people who are close to those who think they know everything in their teens and early 20s, to give them a good sense of there's a lot you still need to learn.
Okay, so maybe
So
in one of the
maybe
other
another conversation.
another
But yeah, I
conversation
like this.
maybe
Thank you.
is to ask ourselves, when there is a phrase, you shouldn't care what other people think.
Mm,
How do you do that actually in a healthy way? Because you should
There we
care
go.
to some point. You shouldn't just do whatever you want.
I agree with that. So let's pick up on sometime we'll pick up on that one.
Sometimes.
Thanks, Melissa.
Okay, thank you.